I switch the slides? Okay. Feels a little. How are you? I hope everyone had an opportunity for a nice little break after the wonderful keynote by Dr. Osheroff and the wonderful presentations and awards. So our symposium this morning focuses on innovation in medical education. My name is Dr. Tal Lee from the University of Louisville in Kentucky. So medical education, like every field, benefits from advances in innovation. But what is innovation and what constitutes good innovation? And so that will be a concept that we will explore over the next hour with our distinguished speakers and in a panel discussion. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker, who was introduced this morning, Dr. Professor Ronald Hardin, who is the current editor of Medical Teacher and the former General Secretary and Treasury for the Association of Medical Educators of Europe, and of course the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award for APMEC. So since he already had a wonderful introduction, I'd invite him to start us off for our first talk. Please welcome Professor Hardin.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction and for the invitation to join on what I think is a very important symposium. Understanding successful innovations was the challenge of my presentation. Understanding successful innovations. You heard in Neil's presentation before the coffee break about the book I wrote with Pat Lilly. We talked about the 8 roles of the teacher. And one of the roles we talked about was the teacher as a scholar, the teacher as a researcher. But what we emphasized also, and it's the theme of this session, the teacher as an innovator. As teachers, we all are innovators. But what identifies a successful innovator? What identifies a successful innovation? That's the challenge. And I wanted to look at it with you using 6 case studies, six case studies of what I think are recognized as successful innovations, innovation to input to medical school, to the process of the curriculum, and to the output of graduates. So I want to look at these 6 case studies and say, what makes them successful innovations? I think there have been successes now in the move to a different approach to selection, away from just looking at academic skills to other attributes. And also relating to that, how do we widen access to medical school so that the graduates more closely match the population they'll serve? Again, there's some successful innovations there in relation to widening access. And with the process of the curriculum, it went to some time ago, the SPICES model. John Dent's just written a paper in Medical Teacher that why it's been such a successful model for looking at medical education. The SPICES model, student-centered learning, problem-based learning, integration, community-orientated learning, electives, and a systematic approach. And where do you want to be in each of these continua? And also the move as part of that continua to community-based teaching, moving more of the training into the community. And again, there's good stories of the success of that. And looking at the output, one of the moves often regarded as probably the most important change in the last decade in medical education, the move to outcome or competency-based education. And how do we measure the quality of the graduate or the student graduating the objective structured clinical examination? So 6, I think, successful areas where there have been success in medical education. We discuss these in more detail in our other book, Essential Skills for a Medical Teacher. Why are they successful, these 6 trends I've mentioned? But if they're successful, what do they have in common? What perhaps made them successful? Why were these successful innovations? What had they in common? And I think they had one thing in common, was that they had a common purpose. There was a clear answer why they were doing this. They were all related to the suggestion of an authentic curriculum, a curriculum where the graduates and qualification would have abilities to practice as a doctor. The graduates and qualification would be able to meet the healthcare needs of the population they're serving. So these had all that common, there was a common purpose. Now, this notion of why or purpose was highlighted in this interesting book by Simon Sinek, who said we should always start with the question, why are we doing something? If we're innovating, why are we innovating? He said, in an innovation, success depends on answering the why question. We should start by asking, why are we innovating? Not what or how are we innovating? So I think it's answering the why question, the purpose of innovation. I think looking at the purpose why we're doing things is important. There's a very interesting study by Wayne Hodgins, who described himself as a future strategist. And he looked at ice distributors in North America, and he looked at what happened when refrigeration came in. And what was the depressing result was that most of the ice distributors went out of business. They didn't move into refrigeration. And he said, this is a challenge for us in education, because what they were so busy considering their activities, distributing ice, they didn't ask, why are we distributing ice? What do people need the ice for? To cook the food, the drinks, and so on. And refrigeration is a better way of doing that. We didn't look enough at the purpose. And what he said as a result of this study, there's a lesson in education which we could consider much more in any innovation or anything we're doing. Why are we doing it? What's the purpose? So I think the success of these innovations I've suggested, there was a clear purpose. It was an authentic curriculum that would lead to more graduates able to serve the communities after qualification. There's a lot of other studies about successful innovations, and I thought related to this notion of authenticity and purpose of innovation were the four characteristics Schneider described also when he looked at successful innovations, not in medical education, but in education generally. And these all had the similar theme of authenticity and purpose. The first characteristic he described was perceived significance. The idea that succeeded addressed an important problem. There was a purpose behind it. It addressed an important problem. And secondly, he called it philosophical compatibility. The idea seemed reasonable. It was clear to those expected to adopt it what the purpose was. They should understand the purpose and why they were doing this. And thirdly, occupational realism he described. The idea must be practical and easy to put into use. And lastly, he decided it also must be transportable. Simple principles can be easily implemented and can be adopted in different situations. So just four of the characteristics all had this aim of purpose. So these are exciting times in medical education. We're seeing many innovations proposed, many innovations happening. And I wanted to suggest as a result of this very brief look at some successful innovations, that a feature of a successful innovation, which is what we're discussing in this symposium, is that we must ask the question at the beginning, why are we innovating? Why are we innovating? And I hope the answer is to have a more authentic curriculum. So understanding successful innovations, I've tried to suggest that one way of doing this is by looking at why we are innovating. It was interesting quote by Sir Pietro said, a dream will not become innovation if there's no realization. There's got to be realization of what we're doing. There has to be a purpose. We've got to ask the why question and an authentic curriculum. So if we have to, I would argue, to have a successful innovation, we have to look at, is it contributing to authentic learning? And is it contributing to relevance? And Neil highlighted some of these issues earlier this morning. So these, I think, are key features of an authentic innovation, of a successful innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harden, for starting us off on this wonderful topic, and we will certainly come back to it later during the panel discussion. I will just also remind that there is a virtual audience watching along with us, and we hope that you have questions as well. And so if you do, please enter that into your interface, and we will queue them up during the panel discussion at the very end. So I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Go-Po Sun. He is Associate Professor in the Department of Diagnostic Radiology at the Yonglou Lin School of Medicine. He is also, a leader within the National University Health System, and he is involved in many international organizations, including AME, the Associated Medical Educators of Europe, working with Professor Ron Harden. And he has a deep passion for e-learning technology. And so we'll be, in fact, talking about new directions in education technology. Please welcome Dr. Go. Thank you.
Thank you, Tao. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this session. All the slides which I show you and my narrated full transcript are available on an open access blog online. So if you search for my name, Go-Po Sun, no spaces, space Instagram, Google search, you'll be able to go into a Google Instagram page, and if you click on my Linktree link under the profile, there's a blog with the full transcript of my presentation and these slides. So this is the title of our session. And as a very short introduction, I'll just mention that last week I noticed in volume 6 of Medical Teacher 2 APMEC guides on artificial intelligence, or AI. I also picked up on the theme of next year's APMEC 2024 conference to be held in Colombo, Sri Lanka, on AI in health professions education. And also, last week, the official ChatGPT app was launched on the iPhone store, potentially making this available to hundreds of millions of mobile devices. Earlier this month, a white paper on regulating AI was made available online for upcoming debate in the EU. AI experts testified at the US Senate hearing on the need to regulate AI. And a luminary team of pioneers in AI publicly called for a 6-month moratorium on AI. I also had the opportunity to read an article in the back page of our Business Times newspaper here in Singapore, written with the aid of generative AI in response to a series of quite serious questions by the author of this article, including what the meaning of life is, and also how Douglas Adams would have answered this question. An applied example of a human author working with generative AI. On last weekend's edition of the Financial Times was also an article in the Big Read exploring the AI revolution already transforming education. So AI is not only a hot topic, which is topical and trending, AI is already here. In my presentation, I'll focus on 3 directions. So all of this is in the abstract, exemplified by virtual, augmented, and mixed reality AI, including the latest debates on generative AI and ChatGPT, and the current and future promise of mobile technology networks anchored on 5G and future 6G wireless technology. But this discussion will be strongly anchored on addressing the job to be done, to quote Clayton Christensen, or Clay from Harvard Business School. We will frame the use of educational technology in the context of human needs by augmenting, expanding, and extending our human capabilities and reach. And ultimately, bringing us closer together. Because ultimately, we as humans interact and engage with and for fellow humans. Technology, including educational technology, is a way, a method, and a tool to get the job done. To paraphrase Clay Christensen from Harvard Business School, what and how we do this is driven by who we do this for and why. What are our aims, goals, and objectives? What we use, what is widely adopted generally, is not only what is fit for purpose to get the job done, but what is also widely available at hand, that is easy to use, that is well designed and intuitive, that is familiar, which we and others have ready access to and is affordable. As clinical teachers, we are familiar with the phrase, see one, do one, and teach one. Seeing includes all our senses, what we see and hear, what catches our attention, what we have experienced, tried out, and feel. Doing includes exploring, practicing, and engaging in initial structured and guided practice with feedback, and then applying this in practice. Teaching includes sharing, demonstrating, discussing, and engaging in both open reflective practice and scholarship within a community of practice, like we are doing here at APMEC 2023. One way that I have found useful to think about VR, or virtual reality, AR, or augmented reality, and MR, or mixed reality, is as a guide in your hand. Simply a guide in your hand or on you as wearable technology, which augments and extends what one is able to see. Thinking about AI, or artificial intelligence, or augmented human intelligence, AHI, as your guide by your side, with you. And mobile technology devices and networks or technology connecting us to each other in a community of practice, and the cloud of information and intelligence, both human and AI, both on device and as edge computing. These new directions or technological paths can be viewed as an extension of what we are familiar with, from pictures and illustrations and audio narrations to the use of video and virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. Having a heads-up display available on your car windscreen with essential information like speed and direction navigation guidance to turn right or left, and an aircraft pilot's headset are already here. They are established, useful, and use cases. Holding up your mobile device with information or having wearable technology with this information is very similar to holding up an X-ray next to a patient or using a dissection guide in anatomy. AI is the informed peer or instructor by your side. Mobile technology devices and technology networks simply allow one to ask someone or look something up. Interacting using our voice and gestures on virtual and mixed reality platforms is simply an extension of what we currently do, interacting with our devices by speaking and touch, and in previous generations, asking and conversing, using pen and paper, gesturing and pointing, even using a stick in the sand. My aim in this short presentation was to highlight 3 new directions in educational technology, show that these are extensions of what we have used before and are familiar with, and that these technologies are simply tools for human use to assist us in our tasks, our jobs to be done. and to frame the use of educational technology in the context of human needs by augmenting, expanding, and extending our human capabilities and reach to ultimately bring us closer together. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Poe, for that outstanding discussion. So now, as you can see in the sequence, Professor Harden has addressed the why of innovation. Dr. Goh has talked a little bit about the what's next, what's coming our way. I will now talk about the how, design thinking and other methods of innovation. Again, my name is Tao Li from the University of Louisville, where I'm associate clinical professor in allergy immunology, but I also work in faculty development there, at the School of Medicine. My disclosure is that I'm also the CEO and founder of ScholarX, and a lot of my lessons learned in innovation comes, outside of a university setting. My discussion will be restricted only to innovation methodology and to open access products. I'm also the author for First Day for the USMLE, and so that is my other disclosure, which is published by McGraw-Hill Education. So a little bit about ScholarX and how it will perhaps color some of the perspectives I will be sharing on innovation methodology. ScholarX is a social enterprise organization that is focusing its work in the innovation of shared collaborative medical education. And I think that ties to something that Dean Sang talked this morning about working together, that if we work together, we can go further as opposed to working on ourselves. In our space, our challenges are that we deal with poorly defined domains, very challenging problems where there are very few well-established precedents, where there are many stakeholders that often have conflicting needs, and where we are dealing with situations that are complex and evolve over time. Let's see, do I have a mouse here? At the university, as I mentioned, I teach in the Leadership and Innovation in Academic Matters Center. This is a faculty leadership development program that's designed to develop the next generation of innovation leaders within a setting of resource constraint and also with the typical complexities and bureaucracies of a state-funded university. We've already graduated 5 cohorts since 2018. So, we talked about hype and what's going and the need to understanding the difference between hype and innovation. So what you see here is the Gartner hype cycle. The Gartner is a US-based consultancy group. They developed this idea in 1995 that often when there is a new technology, it's poorly misunderstood. And if I can get to a laser pointer. Okay, very good. This is laser point. Okay, and that there's often this peak of inflated expectations, and later on, when things don't work, you get into this trough of disillusionment, followed by the slope of enlightenment once we start to figure out how this technology or innovation works, and then plateau productivity. So you can argue, for example, the AI technologies, generative AI technologies that Polson was just talking about, perhaps maybe here right now at the peak of inflating expectations, is almost as if we've discovered fire and now we're trying to figure out what you can do with fire. And then some of the things that Ronald Harden just talked about, such as OSCEs and so forth, is a mature innovation that has found its place in medical education. What you notice that there's a whipsaw. Now, we'll set aside that there may not be that much empiric evidence that supports that this type of curve exists for all technologies, but to, again, understand that hype, it may not be aligned with the actual expectation of the technology. And if we think about the Everett Rogers diffusion curve of innovation, you often, an ideal adoption of innovation is that you have a slow a slow adoption as you figure out the technology, and as the technology scales up and finds it fits. This is where you get your early majority adopters and your late majority, and then later on, when it flattens out, that's where the laggards, or the folks who come in at the very end, who are skeptical, either skeptical or very conservative with their adoption of technology, will get engaged. In the business world, there are many innovation methodologies, and a helpful way of thinking about that is thinking about how well is the problem defined. How clear is that? Do we know, or are there technical specifications to that problem? And also, how well is the domain that is used to solve that problem? Is this a physics problem? Is this a chemistry problem? Is this a human problem? Right? So based on that, you can decide what category of innovation that you might have to apply to the problem that you're trying to solve. The other way of thinking about selection of innovation is, where are you in the innovation process? So the typical process is identifying the insight into human observations into what the world is and what the world could be, and then better defining the problem or the needs assessment, or developing a needs statement, and then going through a process of developing a solution, then some sort of business or a sustainability model, and then being able to scale it beyond your institution, this organization. And again, there are a variety of innovation processes that can be applied to that. And for the purposes of this talk, we will focus mostly on design thinking, and we'll talk a little bit about agile, and which is also very closely related to lean startup, because this covers a good chunk of this innovation journey. So design thinking has been around for several decades. You can be thought of as a structured, human-centered approach to creativity, which is divergent in how you approach it, leading to the innovation, the actual innovation, the application, once you develop the idea, and then try to apply it to the human situation, which is a convergent process. As I mentioned, it developed in the product design space. It was fostered and championed by folks such as Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO, which is an innovation organization, and organizations such as the Design School of Stanford. It's often used to address wicked problems. So there's a whole literature on wicked problems that are often complex, poorly defined problems with no obvious solution. So how do you even approach something like that? And now it's being applied to education, and including healthcare education. And Polson and John Saunders recently wrote a paper about that, and I provided the reference here. And here's the classic design thinking article by Tim Brown in the June 2008 issue of the Harvard Business Review. So I'll provide that as a resource. But again, what we'll do is we'll use the D School definition. So D School is the design school at Stanford University, and they break it down into a 5-step process. You can see it right here. And the very first step of the process is really to humanize this, all right? And it gets back to Ron Hardin's exhortation that we need to figure out the why. Start with why, Simon Sinek, right? So make observations, view users' behaviors in the context of their lives. Where are they being challenged? Where is the pain point? Where they're suffering? Where there's a job to be done? Engage with them, learn about it in a qualitative manner, not a quantitative manner, and then immerse yourself in that situation. In other words, walk a mile in their shoes. And then be able to define the problem and translate into the insights, and then define that point of view that captures the emotion, not just the technical aspects of the problem, but the emotional, the contextual, the cultural context of the challenges. And then you'll be able to ideate. That's part of the divergent process. In terms of developing a range of ideas, and actually the more absurd, actually, perhaps the more potentially successful, because sometimes those are the approaches that are required after all the obvious solutions have been exhausted, and you're usually going for quantity over quality, because then later on, then you'll funnel them down into the most feasible ideas. So again, that's the convergent thought process, where you now actually take these ideas and bring it into something that has some connection with reality, so it becomes tangible. It can often take a physical form, and you're usually looking for low resolution, so very what we call dirty prototypes, very low res prototypes, so you can just get a sense of what it is. You're not trying to invest much in that solution. You just investing enough just to see how it works and understand the dynamics. And then as you do that, you test it, iterate it. It becomes more refined, it becomes more polished, and the whole purpose is actually not to create the product, it's actually to learn. You're learning from the users, you're gathering feedback, and then you can figure out if this is truly the viable solution, how you scale it, and so forth. So in medical education, this has been used for curriculum development, faculty development, education, research, and scholarship. So for example, at the LEAM program, the Leadership in Academic Matters program at the University of Louisville, it's been used for the gamification form of assessment in the clinical space. It's been used to address difficult quality control issues within the hospital setting. And so, every year, several projects come through that program. There are some limitations. The empiric evidence is not as strong as we'd like to be, versus what we often see in biomedical science research. Design thinking is relatively novel in many institutions, so it may not be something where you have a lot of colleagues that you can lean upon for examples and also for support. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And it often is not complete by itself. It may require other innovation methodologies, such as what I had showed earlier. So a couple of words about ideation through an analogy. So remember, the second step was ideation. And there are some best practices about it, but I want to specifically talk about one type of ideation, which is through analogies. This is Niels Bohr's. He developed, the Bohr model, in the early 1900s about how electrons and atoms are organized, and he and other scientists used the analogy of the solar system to organize the thinking, and that actually helped them innovate the Bohr model, and also actually, most interestingly, be able to communicate that to other audiences that were outside of the quantum physics space. So, in fact, there is an innovation process called the A4 innovation process by Gassman and Jeske, developed in 2008. And you can see it actually has some similarity to design thinking. So the 4 A's stand for abstraction, analogy, assessment, and adaptation. The first two steps here are the divergent steps, and then the assessment and the adaptations are the convergent steps. And so what you do is you try to break down the problem into its abstract concepts that you can then generalize with other related or unrelated domains, find hopefully an analogy where someone else has perhaps solved a similar problem, assess the validity, feasibility, and so forth, and then apply it to your space. So I will provide two examples from our work in shared education innovation. So, at ScholarX, one of the things that we've noticed is that the medical education process is often redundant and is wasteful in terms of resources. There are 3,000 medical schools recognized by World Directory of Medical Schools. Do all of us have to create an anatomy of the heart talk or resources? So when we abstracted it, we thought about, well, what's preventing that? It's the issues of reusability, modularity, and interconnectability. Now, you may or may not agree with us that those are the right abstractions. You have to come with your own, but that's the process that we went through to get to the abstractions. And so when we looked at other domain spaces, we actually took inspiration from the toy space. And so you all recognize these toys, right? These are Lego bricks, and you can think about it, all the bricks are reusable, they're modular, and they're interconnectable in a very standardized way. And then we ended up building something called RX Bricks, which allows educators to reuse education, interconnect them in a standardized way, make them operable, and make them modular. A second innovation space that we worked in is, again, in sharing and collaboration. And again, the problem that we notice, and the challenge we notice, is that sharing medical education is actually difficult. It's easy to say, but it's actually difficult to do. And then when we abstracted it down, or we abstracted it up to the concept that we thought that was preventing us from easily sharing with each other, we saw issues with open licensing. So how do you apply a Creative Commons license or any type of license that conveys the notion of sharing, versioning, because what works for me likely will not work for you, modifiability, because you will have to change, revise it, and so forth, and then author attribution. Who contributes to this? How are they recognized? And so the space that we looked at too was the open source software space, and one of the largest players in that space, so anybody who's in technology or software will instantly recognize this organization called GitHub, which allows millions of software developers to share and disseminate open source software to each other so they can build on each other's software innovations. And then we built, based on that analogy, we created the Brick Exchange, which allows educators to freely share with each other, apply a Creative Commons license, to be able to version each other, modify, and then attribute to each other, and share not only the benefits, but also share the credit. So Agile methodology is something that developed in software development, and this actually allows us to scale the innovation, right? It's different from, say, a classic process like waterfall, because it breaks up the project into several phases. There is an emphasis instead of delivering one big project at the end, let's say a 2-year project, let's say you're doing a big 2-year curricular reform project, you actually build it in chunks and you deploy it in chunks so you can see how it works. And so this often happens in what's called time-boxed situations. In software development, we call them sprints. So if you hear a software development, say we're doing a 3-week sprint or a 2-week sprint, but the idea is that you're actually deploying it and you're actually getting to the stakeholders instead of just holding it behind. As I mentioned, there is another methodology called Lean Startup, which I won't go into here, but there they talk about a minimum viable product. So the minimum solution that you can get out there, it's more than a prototype. It is actually something that should be used and should be able to derive and develop benefit and value, but it's what is the minimum to meet that. So again, this is just a visual that demonstrates the difference between the classic waterfall approach that we often do in a lot of our projects, whether it's software or curricular, analyze, plan, design, build, test, deploy. But the idea here is that we break it down in chunks, and then we do smaller development cycles, deploy, over time. And what that allows us to do is to be able to adjust for changing requirements as we learn. Sometimes the customers and the stakeholders change. And also, we learn a lot about the technologies that we're using. That evolves over time as well, too. Pros and cons is that, it gives us opportunity for early frequent feedback. There's more speed to market or speed to the stakeholder, and there's flexibility based on being able to adapt to that feedback. The cons, perhaps, is that it has less formality, less precision. So if there's something that's very, very high stakes, like you're launching a rocket, you tend to have more formality, precision there, and it's less understood in education unless you talk to the software developers. Just a couple of words about organization and organizational culture. When we think about the hows of innovation, this is Peter Drucker. He is considered the father of modern business management, at least in North America. He famously said that culture eats strategy for business. And so the dean may get up here, or the president of the university may get up here, and we have this strategy, and we want to do this. But if the culture doesn't support it, then it is doomed to failure. And so, a couple of things, with culture. One is the more diverse your culture, the more you have an advantage in innovation. There's actually robust literature that shows that organizations that have more diverse, can get more funding. If it's entrepreneurial, it's venture funding, win more patents. The other thing to think about, culture is that it's, the analogy here is that it's like an iceberg. This is where we say this is the way we get things done. And again, this may be the president or the dean getting up and saying that, but then how we actually get things done are all these things below the water. So the dean may talk about vision and strategy and so forth, but behind the scenes, we have procedures, we have stories and myths and legends and habits and so forth. And so keep that in mind, so that all of you as leaders need to think about the entire cultural iceberg and not just what is visible. Thank you very much for your time. With now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Weng Min Huang. Dr. Minh Nguyen Hong is a leader within HIVN, which is the Health Advancement Vietnam, and is the manager for research monitoring and evaluation. He is, one of his areas, of responsibility is the APMEC project, which is improving access, curriculum, and teaching in medical education and emergent diseases in Vietnam. And so, and before joining HIVN, he was a lecturer and researcher at Hanoi University of Public Health. Thank you. Welcome to Dr. Nguyen.
Okay, so we now have the final presentation. In the first one, you think about, listen about what is innovation, what the direction, and so how, and then I bring you to the reality in low setting resources. Vietnamese always say that the theory is gray, but the green, the tree, and also the reality is only green. So I think our share in sustain education innovation in Vietnamese case study can help you have better understanding how we can transform from the theory of the innovation to the real world. In my presentation, I have the three parts. The first one, I would like to introduce our project, General Approach for the Medical Education Reform in Vietnam. I guess that I have some kind of colleagues here in Vietnam. They also involved in that process and also have many experience on that. And the most important thing here, I would like to share some aspect in the education innovation during the medical education reform. And finally, we have some kind of the impact of partnership and policy and the cost limitation during this process. You can see here that APMEC project is funded by USAID. This project aims to provide a technical assistance towards the medical education reform for medical school in Vietnam. In the phase 1, we have 5 UMP or University of Medicine and Pharmacy from 2018 to 2022, and the phase 2 we expand into the 10 medical school from 2022 to 2026. And in the strategy, we try to work with the Harvard Medical School to provide the technical support for reviews, the training curriculum, and also develop the specific guideline for the UMP Vietnam, how to involve in the reform. And also we estimate and get the idea from the information from the technical working group to revise, update the guideline every year to make sure that we can catch up with the latest innovation idea in the world. You can see here that based on those competency-based medication innovation approach, we try to help the UMP in Vietnam to build a training curriculum that met the most needs and also the population health needs. And we apply the principle of backward design, defining the subcomponent for each complexity, and also very important one, creating the milestone for the during of the student and residency when you apply the training curriculum. And also we design the proactive and appropriate action method and also the training curriculum. The first aspect in the innovation I would like to mention here is about the curriculum development. The important thing here, you can see the interactive teaching and learning activity constructed aligned to achieving expected learning outcome when we provide technical assistance. Like we apply in the active learning is a group setting, like think, pair, share approach to generate discussion, learning, and especially the team-based learning is also important one when do the training curriculum and also provide technique for the student. And I think this area is also new for when we upon almost 10 years, we try to some kind of improve the understanding and application of professionalism during the training for the medical educators and also the student. Besides that, the understanding of value of interprofessional care and also the effective communication and team leadership skill also very important one. The second aspect I would like to mention here about the technology. As Dr. Posho and also Tale mentioned a lot about the many kind of technology such as the AI, the learning resource that In Vietnam, we now apply the open source learning system like Moodle for the public university. Especially in the Ho Chi Minh City UMP, we have some kind of the surgical causal resident education we call SCORE, we do and tailor in for the training program for the general surgery resident program. And in one private university, we have some kind of the Canvas or 145 also apply for this one to make sure that we improve the quality of training. And all of you know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we do virtually a lot. So the Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangout also very important. And one more thing I would like to introduce that in the recent year, we work with the ScholarX to some kind of introduce new approach for the educator, also learner to have a new platform for the sharing experience and also knowledge in medical education. That helped all of us when we do the reform. And regarding the partnership, you can see here that the funding from USAID and also the private partner like Microsoft or Samsung or other company, some kind of help a lot during we model funding for the reform. And also both student and faculty exchange and promote research also do it in the partnership. And one aspect very important in Vietnam is the policy. You can see here Vietnamese government create an environmental for innovation through the implementation nation policy related to university autonomy in since 2014. Some kind of encourage the space for the school. They can have some kind of room for the reform. And also we have the new framework to prioritize the investment in technology for the school. And also we create a system for the quality improvement that ensure that the curriculum and implementation to meet it with the quality. And finally, I would like to mention here about the limitation. When we conduct the reform, we have many challenges. The first thing is a lack of leadership can limit the ability to enable or adapt innovative approaches. I can make as example, we have some school during the reform process, they change the leader or the leaders they get retired. So it took time for us to some kind of new orientation and also mobilize the new leader to come up with the reform. And also, of course, the resources in a very big area in Vietnam. One very cynical example, you can see that ratio, the faculty and the student. In Vietnam, I think that the ratio is very limited. For example, each year, school, they often recruit around 400 to 500 students, but number of the faculty is not enough to some kind of cover and to conduct the reform at the training curriculum. And also the Dr. Tao Lei also made the culture very important. So the culture of the institution is a crucial factor, the creation and that after innovation. If the leader of the school, they see that the innovative, the reform is important in priorities, they can do that. But they do not realize that, so the process is very slow. And final one, still much to learn from the less successful reform. Not all of the UMP, we have the same level of the result. So we need still many things to do in the future. So thank you for your listening for our experience in Vietnam. Thank you.
So now I'm going to ask our speakers to come up to the panel chairs, and then what we will have is we will have, I know we started late, so hopefully we can capture another maybe 5 minutes and go to about 11:50. So we'll have a panel discussion, and we'll also be able to take your questions and answers. I don't know if there's a microphone out there. So, and also we do have, again, our virtual audience, and we strongly encourage our virtual audience to share some of your thoughts and questions, and I will be monitoring for those for some of those questions. Hello. Okay, very good. So, let me go ahead and start off the discussion a little bit here. I'm going to ask this question to Ronald, but I think all of us might have some ideas as well too. So, as we know, there's a lot of innovation, but innovation often doesn't work how we expect it to. So I'll start off with you, Ronald, because you've been doing this for many decades. Tell us about an innovation that you thought for sure was going to transform medical education, but just didn't work out. And if you go back to some of the things that you talked about, in that paper you shared and some of these other frameworks, what happened? I think there's
Thank you, Tay. It's a fascinating question and a very important one. Many things I could talk about that didn't work, but let me pick one just to answer your question. And that was one of the issues that I was very disappointed didn't work, because I'd invested quite a lot in it. And that was the notion of an international virtual medical school, where the idea was, this was way back 20 years ago now, so it's some time ago, where schools would collaborate and share the resources. They didn't all have to produce all the self-learning materials. They share resources between the schools. And we had 22 schools who actually agreed and signed up for this collaboration. But it faded out, and the question was why? And I think the key, there are many reasons, but I think the key one was that the teachers weren't ready for that innovation. Maybe it was ahead of the time, I don't know, but teachers were still thinking their role as teachers. As in our book, The 8 Roles of Teachers, thinking their roles as teachers. They didn't think their role was simply to facilitate learning by collecting, using materials that other teachers produce in other schools. So I think a key problem, and I think I could trace that to other innovations as well that have failed, is where the role of the teacher wasn't fully accepted. Another program learning way back in the 60s didn't work. After it worked for a little while. And in the quasi-book program learning, the first chapter in the book is learning without the teacher. And that was a mistake, because teachers immediately saw this was doing away with them out of business, and therefore they didn't involve with it. So I think appreciating what is the role of the teacher at a time of change in medical education is a key factor in change.
Any questions from the audience? Do we have a microphone down there? Is there a microphone if somebody has a questions? There's 2 microphones in the back. Anybody have a question or a comment? Yes, sir. Can you? Can we bring a microphone towards the front? All right, and then we have a.
I'm Dr. Khalil Shibli from state of Qatar. My question is, Prof, or person whoever can answer this. Previously, when we were innovating, there was a category introduced in conferences to submit abstracts, whatever works category. And now we're changing it to what really works. So I just want to know, have we actually moved on to this stage of understanding that whatever works category in education for submitting abstracts to whatever really works? So this topic today is whatever really works, what really works.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you got the questions or no?
All right. So unfortunately, the acoustics is bad up here, but I think what I heard is at a point in time, if I'm paraphrasing, what you're saying is that at some point, particularly perhaps during the pandemic, we had to just figure out whatever worked. But the question is, how do you make it last? What are the sustainability issues? So, and in fact, that actually is one of the theses of what we want to do. So perhaps maybe, we can start with, Hoang, because in Vietnam, Vietnam is a low middle income country. It has to do with very, very little. And at some point, that funding from USAID will not last forever. So what will Vietnam do next? So any thoughts about strategies for sustaining a worthwhile innovation?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions. I think in Vietnam, not only 10 UMC in our project, but we have around 30 UMP to conduct the training program in the medical education. So I think that the first thing that the policy from the government, very important one, to make sure that they have the direction to get the all the UMP in the same way to get the quality of the training. You can see here the trend of the education now totally changed in the past. We apply the CBME and also other technology to conduct that. So we have we have policy space to do that. And the second thing is that the UMP, they have some kind of mobilized funding, not only from the government, from the private partner, from the some kind of fund organization to do that. And the third is very important that Professor Hayden mentioned that the educators, the teacher themselves need to consider the role of the develop the quality of training to be the first priority in the career. Is that much will contribute to the success of the story in Vietnam. Thank you.
Very good. I have a question from our virtual audience. This is from Jai Prashanth Rao. I think this is an interesting question. I'm going to direct it at Posan initially, and if anybody else obviously wants to join in. So with increasing data restrictions and personal privacy concerns, how do we foresee that, that AI innovations will be an accurate representation of the living environment versus the data environment? So, to what extent are we actually addressing reality when, obviously AI is built on data representations?
So it moves to the crux of the question. I think the key is to have a human curator and a human moderator. So that would be the short answer to the question. There's a role for the human. There's a role for us because we're interacting with each other. The other challenge is what happens when machines and software talk to each other without a human interface, which is also a really interesting question.
I think there's an interesting challenge there, and that is to ask the question, what are we expecting to use AI for in education? Is it just to do better what we're already doing? Or is it to do something different, to be creative and innovate and say, here's an opportunity to do a very different sort, like perhaps more adaptive learner, something very different form of education? So I think that's the big challenge that I don't really see being addressed much. Are we simply using AI to do more effectively, more efficiently what we're already doing? Or are we using to have a completely different model for education? And if so, what is that model? And back to my question I raised at the beginning, why are we using AI in education? Why are we using it?
This is Ruben Pudentera's SAMR model, SAMR. Are we just substituting or replacing, or are we truly transforming and revolutionizing, undertaking a revolution in education?
We have about another minute. Are there any other questions or comments? Down to the front on the left side.
Good morning. Thank you for your talks. I'm Solomon from India. You really addressed the why question needs to be answered first. Why do we want to innovate? But how do we sell this idea to the other members of the department or other members of the institution? Because it needs a teamwork for the innovation to happen. So how do we convince others so that the innovation can work? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So just to paraphrase the question, make sure I understand, also for our virtual audience, what I heard is that, how do we, if we are convinced that, innovation needs to occur within our institution, how do we convey that need, to our colleagues, to our department chair, perhaps the dean, and so forth. So that's actually obviously something that, a number of us addressed or at least touched on with regards to the cultural iceberg and the organizational needs. But why don't I start with some of our partners here who are working in complex organizational environments? How have you tried to convey the need for innovation and convince your stakeholders to join? Anybody want to start?
I think there could be many answers to the question, which is a key question that you've asked. If I had to pick one quick answer before passing on, I think it involves the students. I think there's good evidence out there that if students get involved with an innovation and help pursue it, it's more likely to be effective. So I think involve all the stakeholders, but in particular use the students as mechanisms for bringing about an innovation. That's the future.
Two quick answers. The heart drives the brain, drives the hands. And who pays for it? Does the student pay for it? Does the public pay for it? Or does someone in the ministry pay for it?
I would like to say a story about our project, how we can sometimes convey with this issue. First thing when we introduce our innovate idea about how we can reform the training, many faculty they reject and they update that. We only conduct training like this, and the student they graduate is still a good doctor, a good nurse. So how can come up like this? So we try to start with small area. We create some kind of core group of faculty in XUMP, and we can some kind of do technical assistance for them, and we apply in some area, in some module or some training, and the outcome, the product is so really good improvement in comparison in the past. So it's some kind of way we can convince the other faculty in school. Yeah.
Very good. I think we are actually at time, right? We're at 11:50. So I want to thank our speakers and panelists, Professor Harden and Professor Go, Dr. Wang, for their outstanding discussions. We'll be around here if you have some further questions or thoughts or ideas. And we wish that hopefully you'll take some thoughts and ideas about how you can propagate innovation at your institution, be a leader in that. And then we wish you otherwise a good and productive conference. Thank you very much.